Okay. Can everyone see and hear me okay? All right. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning for our SASP and SAVAF webinar. We're just going to be going over some updates to the RFPs for these grants. We're going to run through both of them. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of each. We're doing SASP first. So if you're just here for SASP, you're going to have an opportunity to ask just your SASP related questions after that portion of the webinar. And if you have other things you need to do today, and you need to drop off the call right after SASP, feel free to do so. You will, that is perfectly fine with us, but we will be going through both, and we'll also have a Q&A at the end of SAVAF. If you have any questions for either, we can ask them at that time as well. So getting things started. Oh yeah. Well, we're going over, sorry, off screen today is my handy dandy fellow senior grant manager, Becky, and she will be monitoring the chat box. We just ask that you keep your lines muted during the presentation. We are recording, but Becky and I will be monitoring the chat box for any questions you might have outside of that Q&A. So if you have any pressing questions, feel free to drop it in that chat box, but we will have time for a Q&A if you'd like to unmute and ask things at that time. So like I said, we're going to go over SAS first. We're going to cover program scope, eligibility, purpose areas, priority areas, program requirements. We're also going to talk about allowable activities, unallowable, and out of scope activities. A note about travel and program costs, and we are also going to talk about required attachments before that Q&A. Like I said earlier, not everything, this is just going to be an overview, so I'm not going to necessarily touch on every single thing in the RFP. So of course, we advise still reading the RFP as you're filling out your application. So as per usual, we will be taking all applications on IntelliGrants. They are going to be due on October 22nd for an award period of 1 year starting January 1st, 2026, ending on December 31st, 2026. For any technical assistance you may need, please contact the help desk. The email is right there and will be available on the grant page for this grant following the conclusion of today's webinar. So, SASP. It was created by the Violence Against Women Act, reauthorization of 2005. It is for supporting rape crisis centers and other nonprofit, non-governmental organizations or tribal programs to provide intervention and related assistance to victims of sexual assault regardless of age. As with our other grants for victim services at CJI, this is a reimbursement grant, and it is bound by the provisions of 2 CFR 200 and the DOJ Financial Guide. To be eligible for this grant, you must be a rape crisis center, which can be a nonprofit, non-governmental, tribal organization or governmental entity providing intervention and related assistance to victims of sexual assault, regardless of their age. In the case of governmental entities, so if you are a governmental entity considering applying, you cannot be part of the criminal justice system. So that means no law enforcement, and you have to be able to offer no law enforcement or equivalent criminal justice government agency, and you have to be able to provide comparable services in terms of confidentiality to the nonprofit entities. For other non-governmental or tribal programs, we also offer this to other non-governmental or tribal programs and projects to assist individuals who have been victimized by sexual assault. So again, moving on through those continuing eligibility requirements, as with our other grants, you must have a unique identity ID, be registered in SAM, have good standing with the state, and we are also requiring that everyone enroll in E-Verify. If you want to reach out to grant manager, we're happy to provide the link to that website. We're not experts in how to register, however, so you may want to follow the instructions on the website, but that is a requirement. And if you are awarded funds, we will be unable to execute your grant until all of these eligibility requirements are met. So we know E-Verify may be new to some of you. Please make sure you are registered if you are awarded funds.
The link is also in the RFP.
Yes, the link is also in the RFP. So for the purpose areas of SASP, of course, it's to provide intervention and related services to victims of sexual assault, their family and household members, and those collaterally affected by the victimization. It's also to establish maintenance, expansion of rape crisis centers, intervention that includes 24-hour hotline, accompaniment, crisis intervention, information and referral, community-based, culturally specific services, and development and distribution of material. If domestic violence or human trafficking victims disclose a history of sexual assault, including by a current or former partner, they may get SASP-funded services to the extent of their need for services related to the sexual assault. So our priority areas for SASP per the RFP are to combat human trafficking and transnational crime, with a focus on crimes linked to illegal immigration and cartel operations, to support safety and justice for trafficking victims who also experience sexual assault, and to expand victim services to underserved areas, particularly emphasizing housing and victim services, and improving law enforcement responses in rural and remote areas, tribal nations, and small towns with limited resources. So as far as other requirements for receiving SASP funds, you will need to attach a confidentiality form. It is a requirement of SASP that you may not disclose or reveal or release any personally identifiable information collected in connection with services. That includes whether the information has been encoded, encrypted, or otherwise protected. We do have a link to the form on our website on the resource pages and in the RFP. We also are requiring that you complete and attach a form regarding determination of suitability to interact with participating minors. This is a requirement that applies regardless of an individual's employment status, and it is also available on our resource page and our RFP, a link to that form. Please be advised that this form should be completed for this current SASP award period and this current SASP application. You should not be reattaching a suitability to interact with minors that was filled out for a previous grant application. So, allowable activities and costs. So, allowable things include a 24-hour hotline, accompaniment and advocacy, crisis intervention, information and referral, those community-based, culturally specific, development and distribution of materials related to the services described above. And if you're requesting reimbursement for equipment or supplies, you should put those things in the application and describe them in detail in the narrative, especially whether you are purchasing, renting, or leasing any of the equipment or supplies you are requesting. So now on to victim assistance and flex funding as part of the allowable SASP areas. OVW encourages to make those payments for these items to the vendors directly. And some examples of those allowable costs on this slide are going to be replacement bedding or clothing or other household items that a victim may need, securing new or temporary housing, including security deposits, first month rent, moving expenses, also travel expenses. So those travel expenses emphasizing for victims in relation to their victimization. Childcare expenses, emergency food, including culturally appropriate food, a utility other than utilities in arrears, and security measures such as rekeying those locks, replacing cell phones, purchasing motion detector or security camera that does not require installation. Things that don't fall under major renovations. So unallowable activities and costs include education and prevention activities, trainings on sexual assault for other professionals, or developing training curricula. SART team coordination is unallowable. Activities conducted by or inherent to the criminal justice system, such as sexual assault nurse and forensic examiner programs, law enforcement investigation, and prosecution of sex crimes. Food and beverages are unallowable, with that exception of emergency food, as we touched on the slide before. Lobbying, of course, and fundraising are unallowable, you cannot purchase real estate or vehicles with this grant, and construction and physical modifications to buildings, including minor renovations such as painting or carpeting, are also all unallowable. If you are already receiving a grant from us, some of these may not be a shocker, but again, please refer to the RFP when you're looking for allowable activities and unallowable activities for more detailed language. Again, very important to review the RFP for these items because there will be more detailed language in this. This is just summary. But out-of-scope activities can include research projects, promoting or facilitating violation of federal immigration law, promoting gender ideology, promoting discriminatory or illegal DEI programs, framing domestic violence or sexual assault as social justice issues, generic community engagement without a clear link to the purpose areas of SASP and prevention. Programs that encourage, discourage collaboration with law enforcement, awareness and media campaigns without tangible incomes, providing illegal aliens prioritizing illegal aliens services over U.S. citizens, legal residents, excessive consulting, training, admin costs not tied to outcomes, activities or programs that unlawfully violate a federal executive order, human trafficking efforts that are unrelated to SA. As you recall, human trafficking is a priority area, but it should be related to sexual assault. Murdered Indigenous persons activities unrelated to sexual assault, prevention and public education efforts. This includes bystander training. Criminal justice related projects, including law enforcement, prosecution, courts, and forensic interviews, sexual assault, forensic medical examiner programs, SART team coordination. Some of these should be familiar from the last slides, but I'm reading them off anyways. You will find it in more detail in the RFP. Training for allied professionals, domestic violence services that are unrelated to sexual violence, as mentioned on the other slide. If if you're providing services for sexual violence to a domestic violence victim, that can be allowable. Again, refer to the RFP. And legal services. Ooh, I know that's a lot. Continuing on unallowable activities, SASP program does not fund activities that jeopardize victims' safety or deter and prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, and they should not be allowing offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. The following activities on the next slide are found to jeopardize victims' safety, prevent this healing, and allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. So make sure that when you are writing your SASP application that activities mentioned next are absolutely not included. Excluding a victim based on a protected classification as described in the code in parentheses next to it. This can include health, criminal record, income, or the age or sex of the victim, compromising confidentiality or privacy, requiring victims to take specific actions and penalizing them for not doing so, failing to conduct safety planning with victims, not addressing the needs of individuals with disabilities, limited English proficiency or victims who are deaf or hard of hearing, using technology without considering confidentiality, safety, or consent, partnering with entities that undermine victim safety or offender accountability, using materials not tailored to sexual assault dynamics or target populations, and denying services based on the relationship to the offender. As an overall note, you'll see this again when we cover SAVAF, but as a reminder, per our state policy, non-essential travel is currently excluded from our budgets. So these are not allowable to add to a budget. Only travel that is essential. So that travel for direct services such as program mileage or a registration fee, those things are going to be allowable to add to your budget. But as far as things like a flight to attend a conference or lodging for a conference, those are currently excluded as non-essential travel in our allowable travel cost terms right now. And then program costs, they must be necessary and reasonable for the stated purpose of the grant. They need to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, conform to limitations and exclusions in 2 CFR 200, and the SASP grant program requirements, consistent with policies and procedures in this grant program and must be applied uniformly. We also need that adequate documentation. So please refer to our supporting documentation policy. Make sure you are submitting your relevant and required materials like receipts, invoices, timesheets, pay stubs, proof of payment, all that good stuff. And of course, if you need any clarifications about our proof of policy, our proof of payment policy, our supporting documentation policy, please reach out to myself, Becky, your grant manager. So just going back over the general required attachments, you should have that total agency budget. That is an Excel document on our resource page, should also be linked in the RFP. If you have de minimis or an indirect cost rate, please attach that documentation, your sustainability plan. This is how you will describe how your program will be sustained after the grant period ends. A timeline for your project, letter of endorsement, and it should be for this SASP program. And then your miscellaneous things. So if you're funding any personnel, attach their job descriptions. If you are requesting part of a lease or contractor, make sure you are attaching those contracts if they're available. At the moment, we understand some of those might not be available until after execution. Your confidentiality notice form and that suitability form that we mentioned earlier. We're also requiring that you attach an out-of-scope certification letter. It is in Appendix C of the RFP, and any other applicable documentation that you may need for your application. All right, we just went through a lot, but does anyone have any questions about SASP specifically? Becky, are you seeing anything in the chat? All right. I'll give everyone a minute if you're typing something, and then we'll move on to SAVAF. Nope. All right. Well, we will be moving on to SAVAF, but if you have any SASP questions that come up following the SAVAF presentation, we can answer both at the end of that one. All right, so moving on to SAVAF. We'll be covering priority areas, eligible entities, allowable activities and costs, required attachments, travel and program costs, and then we'll also have that Q&A at the end. So for SAVAF, the application and award period are going to be different than SASP. So these applications are going to be due on October 29th. The award period is also going to be a 2-year period, not a 1-year period. It will also start on January 1st of 2026, but it's going to close on December 31st of 2027. So please keep that in mind when you are writing your application and budget. Also, just to emphasize, as with SASP, there may be changes in the RFP from the last time you applied if you are a continuing program. And I would strongly advise reading the RFP because this presentation is just going to be a general overview. So this grant is one of our state grants. It's funded by the Indiana General Assembly, and so it's a program that aims to provide comprehensive statewide response to victims of sexual assault. Funding is awarded to establish and maintain those rape crisis centers, enhance services provided by existing rape crisis centers, and develop and implement and expand trauma-informed services to victims of sexual assault. So to be eligible for SAVAF, you must be a public social service entity, a nonprofit organization, or a non-governmental organization. So under allowable activities and costs, again, we have that 24-hour crisis line, direct services to victims, counseling or therapy, emergency flex funding. Would like to emphasize here that you cannot have direct payments to victims under SAVAF. You will need to pay that third-party vendor directly and have an established policy in place to make sure that the funds are available to all program participants and that they're meeting a reasonable basic need. You'll also need to be providing that supporting documentation for this flex funding. So make sure that if you have any questions or need any clarification on those policies, those general policies we have at CJI, you can reach out to myself, Becky, or your grant manager. Expenses associated with providing services to victims, including travel, phones, interpretation equipment, printing of materials, training costs. Overtime for grant-funded staff, if it is on a separate budget line, that includes the rate of pay. And then admin time, that is limited to the 10% of total grant time. So Those are the allowable things. Moving on to unallowable costs, direct financial assistance to clients. So again, flex funding is allowable under this grant. You just cannot be paying the victims directly. Food and beverages are also unallowable with the exception of emergency food, as is also the case with SASP. Lobbying activities are unallowable. Fundraising, cannot spend any grant time fundraising or grant funds fundraising. No buying real estate, land, buildings, property, not allowed. Construction or physical modifications that includes these minor renovations of painting and carpeting. Can't purchase vehicles, and indirect costs are also unallowable. So as far as our required attachments, there are a few less for SAVAF than SASP, but you're still going to need that total agency budget, which will be linked on our resource page and also should be linked to in the RFP. It's an Excel form. Your sustainability plan and your timeline. Again, these should be specific to your SAVAF program. It will be a similar attachment to what you attach for SASP in purpose, but it should be filled out for SAVAF, not SASP. Your letter of endorsement, again, you'll need an endorsement letter that is for SAVAF, not SASP. And then, of course, if you're requesting any personnel, make sure those job descriptions are attached and any other documentation you may need to attach, miscellaneous documentation, such as if you have a contractor or lease, and that is available now and not after execution. Go ahead and attach those things to your application if they're available. Again, as with SASP, just generally speaking, due to our state travel policy, only direct service travel is allowable. No non-essential travel. That includes flights, lodging, per diem for conference attendance. We're just looking at programmatic mileage, or if you have a registration fee for a training, but we are not allowing any non-essential travel per our current state regulations and policy. And all of your travel requests must follow that policy in general. And then, of course, all your program costs must be necessary and reasonable in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, consistent with policies and procedures, and adequately documented per that supporting documentation policy. Okay, and eligibility, again, just like with SASP, you will need to have that UIE. You'll need to be registered in SAM and have that good standing with state. And again, you will also need to enroll in E-Verify. So make sure that you are enrolled in all of these things and none of these registrations are expired. If any if you are not enrolled or any of these are expired, it may cause delays in executing your grant if you are awarded funds. All right, questions for SAVAF, SASP?
I have one thing to add about SAVAF before we start with Q&A. As a reminder for SAVAF, it is a 2-year grant. Therefore, your budget will need to reflect year 1 and year 2 funding on every single expense, very similar to what is currently. Those funds may not be moved between year 1 and year 2. So year 1 funds must be expended in year 1 and year 2, same as year 1.
Yes. Thank you, Becky, for adding that. Make sure you're adding those labels, particularly in personnel. Make sure year 1 is in the position, year 2 is in the position, not the name of the employee as well. All right. Got any questions?
We do.
Awesome.
If we are not a rape crisis center yet, but are the only provider of sexual assault advocacy services in our area in Indiana, are we eligible to apply for SAVAF?
Hold on 1 minute while we backtrack and get the answer to that. I think I know the answer, but I don't want to speak before I think.
Are you working towards becoming a rape crisis center?
Hi, my name is Hannah. I asked the question. We are not currently in the process, but we plan to start the process in the coming years. And as I stated, we're the only provider of SA advocacy services in our area. We don't have any rape crisis centers currently in our location.
Are you meaning the the components of a rate crisis center?
I'm not 100% familiar with all the components of it. I'm on here as the grant manager, so I can check with our program people. I guess a good follow-up would be if we started the process before we applied or planned to start the process during the grant period, would that make us eligible? Because I know it's something they want to do soon, but they haven't started it yet.
And do you currently have SAVAF funding?
We do not. We have not been successful with getting SAVAF funding in the past, but we would like to see if we can change that.
Yeah, if you can look into that. And again, if you indicated that you may be heading towards becoming a rape crisis center.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would, we can have a more detailed response to this in the Q&A after we get more details, just to look into this further and make sure we're getting you the most accurate information. I know this isn't a very necessarily a satisfying information or answer, but of course I'd recommend looking at the RFP in those priority areas regarding establishment of rape crisis centers, because you may find more detailed information than what we currently have on hand.
Thank you.
What agency are you with? I'm sorry.
I'm with YWCA Northeast Indiana.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your good question. And of course, we'll be in touch with a more detailed response.
No problem. Thank you.
Next question. Can SAVAF emergency funding also cover utility and first month rent?
The answer is yes. So, of course, if it assists the sexual assault victim, it is allowable under SAVAF, those two things that you've specifically mentioned.
Next is, when will SAVAF open? And I believe it's going to open any day now.
Yes. If it has not opened already, it should be open very, very soon. I don't have an exact date if it's not open already, but we are finalizing that to open it. I don't want to give an exact date in case we have any technical errors with IntelliGrants getting that open, but soon. Keep checking back all this week for the next 7 days. Hopefully it's not longer than that. All right, do we have anything else?
That's the question.
Okay.
Thank you, Hannah, for that information.
If there are not any further questions, we can go ahead and end today's webinar a little early, so you guys can get back and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all for attending this morning and spending time with us to learn more about the changes for SASP and SAVAF. And of course, if you have any questions following the presentation, if something strikes you as something you want to ask about, you can get with myself, Becky, or your grant manager. Shoot us an email at any time. I believe my contact information, including my phone number, is on this slide right here. Go ahead and take a picture or screenshot, and we will also be getting the recording of this webinar online as soon as possible. So again, thank you everyone for spending part of your morning with us, and don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything else we can do to support. And I will conclude with that.